Events have the potential to be turned into sites of what are commonly termed as dark or justice tourism. South Africa's troubled history means there's a plethora of dark tourism sites such as Sonwabile and Marikana, and these sites can be developed, commodified and commercialized for local and international tourism. For more on this, we're joined by the Tshwane University of Technology tourism lecturer, Sonwabile Henama. Unati, good evening and thank you so much for your time tonight. First and foremost, explain to me the concept of dark tourism or justice tourism. What is it about, and is Marikana that type of site, or can it be turned into that?
Good evening to all of the viewers. Places of tragedy, just like Robben Island, such as our struggle for liberation, such as June 16, those areas, because lots of human life are kept there, humans will always be intrigued about how people suffering and how people can relate their story about their suffering. And when I gazed on what happened in Marikana, then I said to myself, then we as Africans then have a responsibility to write and say, possibly we should start having a conversation and say, in as much as there was loss of life at Marikana, but why don't we package Marikana and say, this is what happened in Marikana. This was the experience of the community of Bapumamukhali. This was the reaction of the workers. This was something new. This was something which, for the first time from labor relations perspective, occurred when mine workers organized themselves out of the existing labor relations process. So Marikana on itself became something new. And for a post-apartheid state, this was something that shocked the world, that so much human life can occur in a post-apartheid democracy, and possibly the youngest democracy in the whole world. So when I look at Marikana, I see so much potential about how we can create lessons for the future generation that something like this should never happen again. But the most important thing is that we need to preserve that history, ensuring that the history and the contested terrain between some will call it a massacre, some will call it a tragedy, that these contested terrain can coexist so that history is properly articulated.
Before we preserve the history, would it be a wise decision, though, to attempt that project right now when there is still such raw hurt, there is still such raw emotion, but also so much to resolve around this matter?
Well, what you're saying is not incorrect. I believe it is always better to articulate these things while the people are still existing. I mean, just recently we had the Women's March, and people only wanted to document who the participants in the Women's March to the Union Building. So I believe the sooner we do things, the better, because remember, we as Africans must own our story, must own our history, but most importantly, we must define ourselves, being ourselves.
How will the families derive value from this history, Unati? How will they be able to benefit from the monument itself that will be erected, or whatever it is that you be declared a heritage site?
First and foremost, I believe let's look at the history of Ahmed Kathrada, who was tried with Nelson Mandela and lived in Robben Island. Immediately after most of the people left Robben Island, he was the one conducting tours. I believe the people who have lost loved ones, which includes the police, which includes miners who were striking, who were killed, I believe those people would then be the best people who would work at that attraction, telling South Africans, telling international tourists about the experience of Marikana, about how they lost loved ones, about how they lost breadwinners. I believe that would be a much, much deeper experience. Because remember, the tourism industry is an experience industry. It's about articulating your experiences and encapsulating the soul and the attention of those that are receptive to what you're communicating to them. And I believe that would be obviously an empowerment, and most importantly, that would ensure that the memory of the lost lives is not forgotten, because it would be a tragedy that loss of life happens, but we forget them as if they didn't mean anything.
So it would be a means maybe to even start a business opportunity. How do you develop a business out of that history and out of that tragic event?
The intention is to follow the pattern of what happened in Soweto, where all of these attractions, like Hector Peterson, all of them were developed to become heritage sites. You must develop them in such a way that they are restaurants. They say that we don't just go to the attraction, but you spend an additional amount of money eating there, having beverages. So the whole concept is about how you fuse heritage protection and on the side ensuring that there's an element of entertainment without obviously infringing on how heritage is protected. The most important thing is about this history has to be protected, it has to be curated, and obviously has to be sold to the world, because we cannot remove Marikana from our collective history as a country, but we have to draw lessons from that.
How do we connect that with the development of that community? I mean, the sites that you mentioned, Hector Peterson's site as well, it is somewhat of a business precinct now, and I suppose members of that community are also now playing a role in taking advantage and coming up with arts and craft and all sorts of other developments along that street.
I agree with what you're saying. Remember, development is the only way by which we must achieve freedom. And if we create tourism as an economic diversification strategy for the community of Marikana, which is primarily dependent on platinum mining, that will create a new avenue. I mean, look at all the connections. Look at tourism, for example. People that go to Sun City will obviously stop at the Marikana site because it is just around the corner. People who come to the Northwest, who come to Hartbeespoort, we now have a new attraction. So we are conceptualizing and continuing to show the government that if this attraction, if this heritage monument is properly planned, it can become a major money spinner. It might possibly be the next Vilakazi Street, but fortunately in a new province, which will be the Northwest, and give the Northwest province a new tourism attraction.